Hello, my name is Shanae Trudeau, and I'm here with Bhavani Maki for another conversation from the heart. This is the Yogi's Roadmap podcast. We are so happy that you chose to tune in with us today. Bhavani Ma, let's just keep going.
Tune in and turn on, get turned on, right?
Exactly.
You're either on the bus or you're off the bus, as Ken Kesey said, right?
Yep. So, talk to me today about making necessary efforts. As much as yoga is a steady release process, there's also the very real struggle or war against inertia or ignorance, or as you like to say, ignorance, which requires actually putting our bodies on the line. Yes. So, can you say more about the need to, uh, I'm going to say the words, go to war, because I feel that that's that intense against the downward pull of the habit body.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe it's more like the word that Patanjali uses is kshetra, which is also the word in the Bhagavad Gita. And where the Bhagavad Gita, it takes place, it's like it is a war, and it's a war with different parts of the family. Talk about a war that's hard to win, or that you kind of do want to win, but you kind of don't want to win because you don't want it to fragment. It's really about, seeing where our energies are allocated in ways that aren't productive. So the way I like to reframe the vritti, or the thought waves, the involuntary states of mind and emotion, even the electrical impulsations in our body, is that there's like these cross currents. And then when we avoid, all of these things are data. And then we have to kind of sift through that data. And then rather than seeing it as like even self negating or something that is self supporting, it could go either way, right? It depends on how you utilize that information. And so in the Gita, Krishna says, there's Arjuna who's like standing there at the battlefield, and it's not like a subversive battle, but like it used to be. We're going to meet at that, like we're going to meet in the on the basketball court or in the schoolyard at this time, and we're gonna duke it out. So they're standing there, and he's saying, "How can I do this? How can this is my family across the way?" And Krishna is like, "You have to get up and fight for what is Dharma." And I really recently heard uh, a translation of Dharma, which is what keeps us together. And I'm
Mm.
not meaning like put together, but it's about coherency. And so yeah, we have all of these streams. And when what Patanjali says is like the worst, um, he reiterates it in many different ways. Like there's mudda, which is where you get stuck in inertia. And the images of those water buffaloes standing knee deep in mud, and
Mm.
that kind of cattle consciousness. And it can also be being stuck in obsessive, neurotic kind of patterning. um, so inertia doesn't just mean that you're avoiding, well, it is a form of avoidance, and many people avoid. It seems like the trend more is towards making themselves very busy.
Mm.
And what came to me recently, I was giving an astrology reading, and I was looking at this guy's chart, and I was like, have you been so busy trying to prove others wrong that you've been inauthentic to yourself? And I was
Wow.
like, whoa, that's
Wow.
always like a reflection for ourselves. And I was like, I know I did, I did everything opposite um, of what my family did, just to kind of like forge my own path. And it is in my chart. So was it right? Is it wrong? I could, if I had gone the right path, I had a very clear path, I would be like retiring soon and I would have a 401k, but that wasn't my path, and that's okay too, because I'm living a life that's feeding my soul, and my path is helping. It seems like others are benefiting from it too. Yoga wasn't an industry, but really, there's a certain point where, if we, yoga is this radical self-effacement. And it's like, is this helpful? Is this information, is this current something that's helpful? Have I been down this well-worn track, and where have I ended up, So that's why we love the sutra, right? Because it's like, okay, yeah, we can see this pattern. It's like a map of, all right, there's a ditch over there, there's a cliff, there's a sharp turn, navigate carefully these situations so you don't get stuck in a spiral and grind your gears until there's nothing left. You don't have any more traction. So really that inertia is, and it's that sense of the shadow that he speaks about in the fourth sutra, that the shadow is anything that we don't want to touch. It's too scary. And it may be very obvious to other people. And Carl Jung then went on to say that, like, what we don't touch in our shadow manifests as our destiny. There's no avoidance. And Patanjali goes on further that, like, as long as, and listen, these are vital parts of yourself. It doesn't define you unless you're pushing it aside. But when you can get big enough to realize, yeah, I'm strong enough to know that I have wounds. I'm, yeah, I'm self-centered enough that I can, like, develop a healthy sense of self-esteem and personal worth, that I can get bigger to see that I'm not the only one here, and everybody has a right to have their own personal experience. So really the inertia is where we're in that state of avoidance, right? The avidya, or the ignorance. And sometimes we're just, we're never going to see it all. But it's like they say, like, an enlightened person still has shadows, but they're willing to shine the light of love into it. So the battle is really, perhaps, as we've been learning in the Kaivalya which is so freeing, as the name implies. We've worked so hard, we've made the efforts to understand the technology of yoga, to use the somatic practices to evolve our nervous system so that what was too big and too scary, we have the nervous system that's capable of holding it without fear, without shutting down, but holding it with compassion and holding it with equanimity, which isn't disconnected, but it's actually like deepening us and giving us more layers of understanding. So, what we're learning, like in the Kaivalya is that you have many layers. And it doesn't mean that, like there's, again, this idea of being present and being your true self and shoving it down people's throats instead of realizing there's a larger project. And Sangata and community has always been an important part of yoga. And I don't just mean like, oh my God, you have such a great practice, or your hips are so open. But this is like real, like, pulling from the Shastras, the Shotras, the Sutras, the Shlokas, and taking these metaphysical teachings, and then expanding our body of understanding, expanding our epistemology, our cosmology, and having real heart-to-heart discussions in which we form alliances.
Mhm.
And it's a different kind of relationship. And this is where it's like when we bring our strength together. we bring it together, this is where we can really, um, I love what Mr. Iyengar says. It's about the advancement of culture, and we need, and culture is really a like-minded group of people, and who, if there's always somebody who's like opening a new pathway, which seems radical, um, at first and is often dismissed. And that being said, I think there are a lot of radical people out there right now that are just radical for the sake of radical, in which it's like demonizing others. Oh, they drink baby's blood, or there's just like real absurdities there, which are more, they're fracturing
Mhm.
more than anything. So it's not just about like, yeah, I'm going to war. That's missing the point. Um, it's about um, coming into a state of beatitude, right? Doing that work to see where we're avoidant, where we're rough around the edges, getting a bigger understanding, raising the bar for ourselves, not for perfection, but like, yeah, you may be doing your best in any given moment, but that doesn't mean that you're not still growing. So it's our capacity to grow into love. And there's effort there, I mean, we all know that anybody who's any kind of relationship, the honeymoon is very short lived. And then it's really about, the commitment to have each other's backs, and sometimes to give up really cherished parts of yourself, because it becomes a barrier to union, to love, to growth. So, it's so interesting. We have all these little, like, containers. There's the culture within your household. Maybe you have roommates, or maybe you have a significant other, or maybe you have a child. And there's the culture of your family, the culture. There's all of these different layers. Um, so yeah, that battle is like, it should be this way, and it is this way. And our
Mm.
notions of how it should be set us up for failure and disappointment. So the more, oftentimes, like that battle is listening inside of ourselves. And then when we can listen well, and we are listening is a real, um, it's a real art, and it's kind of a lost art. When we look at the yogic tradition, it was all done person to person, heart to heart, mouth to ear. And the caliber of student was like, can they hear it the first time? And maybe they don't totally understand it, but do they hear it? Not like, what did you say?
Right.
And I've noticed that in myself sometimes when something's really significant. If I was in a therapeutic session with my therapist, I would black out. And I'm like, I just blacked out. I know what you said was really important. Will you say it again? And I'm like struggling because I can feel my own, like,
Yeah.
deeply embedded, whatever the resistance is. Like, it's so true that it's so hard for me to take in. And instead of, just being hard on myself, it's like, okay, this is really important. And this is my effort, is to take it in. And I might have to write it down. I would always record my therapy sessions so I could return to them, and listen to them again. But that listening, and then when we really are able to listen, and it doesn't mean that we have to buy in, but we let ourselves go there. In community, we can go there with other people. And I would say, especially in this day and age of social media, and after the pandemic and the isolation that occurred, um, that intimacy is a pretty rare thing where we have really real conversations where we're not just obsessing, but we're really sharing in our hearts. And we're not asking the other person to fix us either, but to hold space for each other. So, Nirmana Chaitanya Smita Matra. That was this week's sutra, number 4-4. And it speaks about, when we allow ourselves to diversify and to realize that we're big enough to express a whole spectrum. We don't have to be one kind of way. We don't have to hold on to that we can be dynamic. We show up for ourselves in the way we need to. And when we have that self-confidence, we can show up for other people in that way. And in that way, there's actual real transmission that occurs. So if we're having some kind of a conflict or friction, and I'm really willing to listen to you, you might be more apt to listen to me. And where we're taking ownership for the tensions that are within us, that are usually some kind of a story that's unwinding, we can own our projections and really come to a greater understanding. And that sounds great when you're in it.
Yeah.
When you're in it, it can be very, very difficult. And then being able to titrate it down, I just had another little marital friction with my husband, and which is, doesn't mean the marriage is bad. It's just part of being honest in the growth. And one thing I learned from my therapist was ask him, what can I give you? What do you need from me? And it was so interesting because in that moment, Ray was like, I don't know. And I was like, okay, well, why don't you reflect on that and let me know? Yeah. And if we can be clear on that with each other or sit with those questions, there's a love space, there's a willingness to grow. We're not trying to convince the other person, but just hey, this is important to me, or this is what I'm needing. Can you help me with that? And sometimes the answer is no.
Yeah.
And we have to have acceptance for that.
How much of this has, maybe I'm just wondering, you touched on fear in there. There's some fear element, and maybe it goes along with fear of death. And there's a sutra that, even the wisest of sages still have fear of death, and that and yesterday you said a great thing. You said right and wrong never go far enough. So it's I don't know exactly my question in there, but there's some piece of this, I'm sensing that it's not the struggle against fear necessarily, because fear is going to still arise no matter what, but it goes beyond that fear-based quality.
So yeah, I mean, that even that sense of beatitude, which is, or what we hear more as bliss, right? It's where we know that we're going to have to sacrifice our ego as we know it. Our ego is not going to be able to hold its form. And what is the function of our ego? The function of our ego is to keep us alive. So, the ego comes in with this inborn sense of the right to be right. It's always the last thing to die. And it's not even, and when we look at in that this sense of the continuity, it's just where it gets everything is recycled in the realm of prakriti. You know, it's born, it has its time to flourish, then it wanes, and then it's reabsorbed, and then there's another iteration or expression of it. So it's like letting go of the construct. You know, as Patanjali says, let me think here. Drikdarshana Shaktyori Ekatma Devasmita. That the eye making sense is basically a conglomeration of our ideas and the vehicles through which we apprehend them, and we so identify with our ideas and our thought constructs and what we think we know we own. So as soon as we let go of that, like, there's kind of a dissolving of the ego as we've held on to it. It's just an idea, really. And then it's absorbed back into nature, which is infinitely creative, and it can construct itself in different ways. And this is where, even like, you know, I was so fascinated by that sutra we just did, because it speaks about when you have enough self-esteem and confidence. And listen, that takes a long time. This is where it's like it's so helpful to have the community where it's multi-generational. It really is. I mean, we have people pushing 80, we have people in their 20s, and the whole span in between. And it helps us to see the longer arc. So it takes a long time to really like prove yourself to yourself and go through the initiations of life and see, you know, and what you learn. Like, the big lessons always come at a cost. So then you start to see, like, wow, you know, I was holding on to that so much, and then when I finally let it go, where I thought there'd be nothing there, it's like the space was created, and there was this other realization, which is that, like, I there's I'm so creative, and creativity is flowing through me. And if I can just really get into that samapatibhyam, which is to realize that there's cycles for everything. So then when we realize our adaptability, we can show up for people in a way that is really what their heart is yearning for. And oftentimes people are just so in the battle or the war, they're in such turmoil and they're really in pain, that it doesn't come out in a clear, like, sutric form. But, you know, if we can even just say, hey, what do you need from me, and let them sit with that. Sometimes we don't even have to say it. We can, like Patanjali says, unfold that part of ourselves, show up in that personality. Like, this person doesn't respond well to, this is what you need to do, and ba 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 ba. Some, you know, and I'm sure you noticed that, right? Like, Patanjali is the 1,000-headed serpent. To be able to adapt yourself to each personality, and that's the beauty of working with, you know, working together with someone through many phases of their life, is you adapt yourself in such a way in which it's not a battle. It's like, I got your back. You know, I'm your ally, and let's work together. And so Patanjali says you can unfold those parts of yourself. Like, okay, with this person, I need to be incredibly tender. I need to speak quietly. I need to get soft in myself. This person appreciates it when I'm just like, when I talk like this, and I'm like, you got this, come on, you got it, you know? Some people don't like that at all. They feel like they're being yelled at. So we can unfold those parts of ourselves and then fold them back up at will and put it in our back pocket without being inauthentic to ourselves.
Thank you for that. it makes me think of that um oh, I just had it and it just escaped me. It'll come back. But the what you speak about community and us being able to come together and really share. I mean, it's like this seen and be seen, which is often, it's not so comfortable sometimes. And I remembered what I was going to say. So you know, all of this is like it's just being an adult. It's like having the sensitivity, to really be in a space like you were saying in the mentorship, with sensitivity and not hiding, but also not, being overbearing, but having that really sacred reciprocity with the space and the other people in it.
And we talked about that yesterday too, the lost art of decorum.
Yeah. Yeah.
That like there's certain spaces that have certain energies, and that we're aware that we're entering this space, so like I love what you said with my shala, right? You come into the shala door, and the door, it being a yurt, the door's a little lower, and you were like, yeah, you have to bow your head to come in.
Yeah.
And then even if the tradition of when, you enter a sacred space in the East, you never step on the threshold. The threshold is a sacred space. And you don't come in wearing booty shorts, I mean, I
Yeah.
might when nobody's there.
Sure.
I might be in my underwear,
Yeah.
but like as far as there's a certain decorum, and there's a certain beauty in that we I just remember, like, I have this tradition of this Easter feast, and I've carried on from my grandmother, and we pull out these spoons that have been in the family for 300 years, and it's certain, it's like the traditional meal, and there's 12 seats at the table, and I spend like 5 hours setting the table. So one time a year, I pull out the iron and I iron my grandmother's linens and everything. It's like, this is the Easter tablecloth, and these are the Easter plates. And one year I invited somebody, and I was like, this is like a sit down meal. It's 5 courses. And they showed up in a t-shirt,
Yeah.
and everybody's there like in their aloha shirts. They pulled out an iron,
Yeah.
because it's part of like the ritual. It's the one time a year I iron the cloth napkins. And there was a part of me, the prudish part, which was just like, oh, really? But
Yeah.
also just understanding that this person maybe never had those kinds of rituals and ceremonies in their family. And
Mm.
that like showing up in that way is really, it adds to the magic and the
Yeah.
specialness,
Yeah.
so like the ritual space of my yoga shala, um, when you go in, I was just thinking about it today, it's like the blankets, there's order.
Yeah.
There's order, not for the sake of order, but
Yeah.
because of the love that's there.
Yeah.
So knowing how to behave in certain spaces, and then there's other spaces where that doesn't matter and we can let it go.
Right.
Yeah. So I feel like, that's something that, and probably because, I am old school in that way, and I have, my family is old school European, and then being raised in the classical tradition of yoga, I've always I enjoy the ritual.
Yeah.
I enjoy it. I even when I would go with my neighbor to Catholic church once in a while, I loved, that they had the big frankincense burners, and that everybody came together like, this is a special moment, and we're going to let go of our personal agenda because we're praising something bigger.
Mm.
I can let I can let go how I want to be and my sense of identity in that moment, because we're feeding the holy here.
Hmm. Hmm. Yes. Amen.
Amen.
I'm old school too. I always have been. I mean, yeah, I'm really like, I'm a full-blown Luddite if we want to go that far.
What's a Luddite mean?
A Luddite was I'm gonna do my best here, but it was actually a sect of I think it was the Amish. It was a sect of the Amish,
Oh,
and they were very much into everything by hand and not using technological advances. So everything was made of wood, everything was very just kind of do it yourself, like the wooden clothespins kind of thing, like everything, didn't I think they even went so far as like to not make metal, but they got a bad rap because they went and like destroyed some some printing press, or I don't know, but I don't know the whole story.
right. Yeah, I mean, it's a fine line between becoming so, I think there's like this distinction between orthodoxy and
Yeah.
orthopraxy, right?
Mm,
And so
mm,
orthodoxy is that you must do it this way,
yeah.
um, and that it's only about the ritual for the sake of the ritual.
Right.
But orthopraxy is like, the experience, the internal experience of love. And I think I can, take the liberty to go on and um, embellish for you as well as myself. As much as we're old school, there's lots of room
Yeah.
for regenerating and bringing life to these strands that have had enough practicality that that they keep going. So it's just a container,
Yeah.
but it's not limited to that crucible. We're creating a
Mm,
crucible, holding the space in which we can enjoy creativity like it's a living science. So in some ways, there's almost a radical approach to going back to the heart of what's there and using, it's like they say like there's certain mantra, and I think it's Rajmani Tigonat, Pandit Rajmani Tigonat, who says like there's certain mantra which have more juice
hmm hmm
because they've been there's been prana through them, there's traditions, and then that prana, you're riding that wave of prana, and then there's certain mantras which kind of have fallen out of vogue,
hmm
so they just have less juice in them. So it's like I pull out my grandmother's tablecloth, there's a lot of juice there.
Yeah.
There's the
Yeah.
juice of the generations and all of the experiences that are woven into it. And that's very much like my yoga shala.
hmm
Everything in there has a story,
Yeah.
has a yatra. And I remember, that trip to India or where it came from, and I can imagine whose hands made it. And there's stories, not even my stories, but like the stories behind that. We having
hmm
traveled to India a lot, there's a lot of Hindu murti because that's what came out of yoga was Hinduism, not the other way around.
Mm,
So there's stories and lore and magic behind that, as opposed to it's interesting to me, and I see it's not right or wrong. I see where people don't want to alienate others. Like some people might be uncomfortable if they went into a yoga space and there's like Shiva and Krishna and Ganesha and Buddha and whatnot, um, because of their own sense of propriety or their own belief system. But, it seems like pretty in vogue to have these very flat, monochromous, like it's like a gym,
yeah.
And for me, I'm like, oh, like that's what I love about my shalas. Like you go in and there's so much divine, like sacred art,
Yeah.
because yoga to me is a sacred art. I mean, it
Yeah.
is. It's not just to me,
Yeah.
right?
Well, your home's like that too. I mean, one can feel it when, when I'm in someone's space, like that they've made it their space. I mean, I'm going through that right now. My husband and I, we're in an apartment and it's not ours, but we do our best to make it really juicy and we have our things in there. And, part of bringing that intention and, and, and I don't know what else. It's like, it's working in service to the space itself.
And that's definitely came through my mother. My
Mm,
mother, as an artist, she always, she would dress that way too. And any clothing that she bought, she would re-sew it. And before it was in vogue with the, what do they call it? Um, boho or whatever, I
mm.
think is the look. She would put stripes with flowers
Oh
and you
yeah.
would just, or polka dots with this. And at that time, people were like, oh my God, but it worked, and she would always say, I want I want to be like surrounded by things that are visually exciting,
Yeah.
where your eye is like carried here and your eye is carried there. And then being an artist too, um, she would trade her work with other artists.
Mm,
And then we had heirlooms like these rugs on my floor here were my grandfather's,
mm.
they're old. They're really old. And, you know, I could probably sell them and pay down a bit of the mortgage, but no, man, they're Shakti. Like my mother crawled on these rugs.
Yeah.
And my father, my grandfather, and my grandmother, like they made a yatra, in Europe and found they're tribal rugs, you know what I mean? And so they were probably on the floor of a tent somewhere,
Yeah.
with camels outside. Like how amazing is that?
Yeah.
It's not about the money, and it's not about, certainly I could buy something new and pretty, but that doesn't interest me so much. I just like that, like, wow, there's Shakti in there. And that's just unique to me. I also,
Yeah.
I appreciate anything that has real intention and design behind it, and that there's some hands and some hearts behind it.
It reminds me of the whole thread of where we've started. So what you said, yoga is a hand to mouth, a mouth to ear, probably too, a mouth to ear tradition. But it's that thread of Shakti, that came from somewhere. You know who your teachers are, you know who your teachers' teachers are, and it's that kind of Shakti that carries through.
Yeah, it's pretty cool to feel like you're held in a larger fabric.
Yeah. Which brings me to my next question is in service to something bigger. And I actually had your Shala in mind when I crafted this question, but it's about seva, the concept of selfless service that is performed without any expectation of reward for performing it. And I personally have always loved this kind of work. I was raised on an ashram, spent many times in ashrams, and just have really enjoyed working for the sake of the space or to feed a crowd of 100, to all of that. And so I find it very nourishing for me personally, um, because I feel like my time is being used well. I feel like I'm being used well. And I know it's part of what you teach and what you offered. So talk to me about the importance of seva.
Yeah, this is a really important question, because, like, this is the last sutra of the Kaivalya is where this is actually mentioned. Purushartha is the
Mm,
first words in that sutra. And this is Purushartha means it means the four aims. Like artha means form and it
hmm
means function, right? And Purusha, of course, is our soul or our spirit. And that, we all come in with certain needs, right? And unless we have these basic needs met, like one of them being arta, which is where arta is where we have enough economic stability, we have enough financial security, we have a vocation in which not some people are they're trust fund people, right?
Mhm.
They've come in with money, and they've come in with wealth and abundance, and so they know, like I know this one guy, and he comes from a really affluent family, who are also, they're very active. I mean, they're professors, and they're active in the civic awareness. And he was like, well, what part of it is that we actually have to donate a certain amount of money every year.
Mhm.
That's the way that it works. Not everybody has that. So, but like, until we have a certain sense of financial security and a sustainable life, until we have enough assets to support ourselves and our family, short of hoarding or greed, um, then we can offer into the community. And wealth includes, friendship,
Mhm.
having a sense of skill, that I have a métier, or I have a vocation that's useful, a dharma, which offers into the community and also helps me utilize my energy, because what is it, idle hands, right? Those stories. So having enough resources. And then also karma, which is that we have pleasure in our life, that it's not just work, 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 but that there's without art or music or beauty or intimacy, our life feels hollow and empty. So as we, work with these basic needs, it's often our passion, comma, and not comma as in like the punctuation mark, comma, right? And arta, which is having enough, and what people need really depends on who they are. And it also depends on their phase of life, right? And are the kids on their own 2 feet, right? Then, that in itself is going to start to bring us to our dharma. And it's natural that when we have a sense of, okay, maybe not, we're not full up, but we have the contentment, which is a feeling of satisfaction.
Mm.
I have enough to share.
Mm.
It's a natural impulse to want to give back,
Mhm.
to want to lift others up. And, as much as it's selfless, I mean, let's get real.
Yeah.
There's a lot of joy
Yeah.
in being able to share with another. I mean, going back to my Easter feast, which is like on the, next month, where there's such a tradition of potlucks. This
Mhm.
is not a potluck.
Yeah.
You come, and I am like preparing a feast, and I'm, assuming all of the costs, and this is where I'm celebrating you.
Mm.
And potlatches and potlucks are really wonderful. But, it's just a natural impulse for us to want to be able to share when we're in a good space. So if we're afraid, or we don't feel like we're supported, it's very difficult to squeeze any juice
Mm.
out of that out of ourselves, and offer. And honestly, in a healthy relationship, right? This is that maitri karuna mudito pekshanam sukha dukkha punya punya pavanatas chitta prasaranam. Right now I'm like laboring over in my manuscript that sutra.
Oh yeah.
And he speaks about, those who are in dukkha, which is when they're in a bad space and they're suffering, we can
Mm.
offer them compassion. We can offer them a shoulder to lean onto. Um, and it's so interesting because then he says, so that's the karuna. For
Mm-hmm.
those who are sukha, those who are like in a good space, and they realize that, you know, they have the they have the heart and the gift to try to um, bring more grace into life.
Mm.
Yeah, sure, they go through struggles and whatnot, right? But they're in a congenial place where they really are not stuck in an inertia. They're really sincere, and they want to offer themselves to a greater project. Patanjali says, make those people your friends. So,
Mhm.
then it starts to reframe our existence. Like sometimes those friends are going through it, and we
Mhm.
can offer them our support. And then they'll, and it's like I had a girlfriend, when I was trying to get pregnant, and she looked at me and she said, Bhavani, I've known you 20 years, and you have always been able to work and achieve whatever you wanted. And it
Mhm.
didn't solve it for me, but I was like, thank you for reminding me of that.
Mm.
And then sometimes I would be with her and she'd be really struggling through something. And I could, so
Mhm.
there was reciprocity. But when somebody's always complaining
Yeah. Yeah.
and always saying how much harder their life is and how,
Yeah.
it becomes a drain, right?
Yeah.
So there also has to be, I mean, look, we have to use discernment as well. Like where are the resources best allocated?
Mhm.
Where is it a bottomless hole?
Mm.
Um, oftentimes, it's like I forget, but there's been many projects where it's like you could donate money to women in Africa or women who were struggling and buy them a couple of sheep
Mhm.
or a cow,
Mhm.
a couple of cows, and then they had some kind of sustenance, and
Mm.
then they were able to like breed cows, and or even little loans, right, that they were able to pay back over time, but you gave them some kind of a seed, um like wealth, that
Mhm.
then they had something, they could make something from it because they had nothing. And then what they'll do, like as soon as you start to do that, it starts to spread,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
That's productive. So that, is it selfless? No, because it feels so good, right?
Yeah.
Make
Yeah.
that difference. And we can do it in such little ways,
Yeah.
Like talk about unfolding and folding parts of ourself up at will. I think I mentioned, the when I was little and I was standing at the bank with my mother, like holding her hand, and there was another little girl my age, and I smiled at her and she stuck her tongue out at me. And I was like, Mom, I asked her in Swedish, and my mother said, blow her a kiss.
Mm.
Or Nico's like, they flipped the nasty finger at me. And I was like, you know, you can smile at them and blow them a kiss. That's what they're looking for.
Yeah.
And I have to say, it wasn't totally altruistic because it was kind of like the ultimate revenge was to
Yeah.
bring back kindness, But
Yeah.
there are so many little ways that we can do that. I've noticed that in my community now that there's so many people with the shuffling of communities post pandemic who have come here. Something has called them here, but they don't really understand the culture,
Mm.
and that they almost have like this very thick shield around them,
Mm.
and you could just look at them and really like look into their hearts, not in an invasive way, and just give them some warmth, and you
Yeah.
see something loosen around them.
Mm.
So sharing our good graces
Yeah.
is just a natural part of us. It's that sense of yama. It's like these aren't things we have to work towards, but if we're not under duress
Mhm.
or, just surviving, it's just our nature to help each other.
Mm. I appreciate what you said about using discernment, because to use one of the phrases I've heard you say is, on the alternate side, it could be hemorrhaging energy. It could just be too much of, you know, and to rephrase, it's like not selfless service, but joyous service. It could be also an escape strategy or some other thing. So using wise discernment.
Absolutely, and that's where it's just like, there is a certain point where, um, we have to look like, was did they receive and did they utilize it in a way that was growing what I'm sharing with them? And it doesn't just have to be money, it could be energy or time or holding space. Or is it an endless energy suck?
Mm,
Sometimes it can take a really long time to see that in a relationship. And there's almost like, just I think there's like a tipping point or a load where you go like, wow, man, it's always all about them,
mhm.
in a friendship.
Yeah.
And then we can just be like, okay, I don't think I'm really helping this person, and it's
Yeah.
not really helping me. And we maybe have that conversation, or we can detach and love and see what's great about that person without demonizing them, but just be like, okay, maybe I'm going to plant a garden over here. Or,
Mm,
yeah. And even feeling like, do you feel a sense of fatigue
mm,
afterwards? Or do you feel like, wow, that felt like a really great sharing,
mhm.
feeding, not a sucking?
Yeah. A mutual beneficial exchange. I feel that so much. I had an interaction the other day, and as pleasant as it was, I really noticed in the evening that all of my energy was coming out sideways. I ended up dropping this glass container of something because I was just so. And, my sweet husband looked at me and he said, maybe it wasn't that great of a lunch date or what, and I was like, oh, right. Yeah, I can't keep giving and giving. I'm like, no more.
Breakthrough. They say when you break something, it's a moment of breakthrough, right? Like the container
Oh, yeah.
can't hold it anymore. And the
Yeah.
one Purusharta that we didn't mention, because there's four, is moksha.
Mm.
So it should be freeing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Not like, okay, now I've set up a system where there's an expectation and there's an entitlement. It's like you're giving to free that person, and it should free you up as well. And on another layer, even the wealth that we've maybe inherited or accrued, we're going to have to pass it on eventually, there is a continuity where nature, it's going to keep being recycled and you know reappropriated, as opposed to being misappropriated. So we want to feel, um it should feel good, right?
Mm. Detach with love and free yourself.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's it. you know um
Yeah. Thank you so much. Anything you want to share in closing?
um yes. So as much as, we do want to have a sense of financial security and a sense of pleasure and passion in our lives, it doesn't preclude that we can't show up in little ways. Okay. So it reminds me so much of what, my husband's teacher, Anandamurti, and my teacher, Baba Haridas, they both taught. It's worth reiterating. I'll say it, I've said it before. The what the whole world has to wait for you to get it together to do a little seva.
Mm.
And this is where even, sometimes like there's going to be moments of depression, there's going to be moments of depletion in our lives. And there's plenty of studies and research to back this up, that when we can step out of ourselves and offer to somebody else some kind of beauty or some kind of grace, it lifts us up. So again, these are guidelines, but obviously there's exceptions to every situation, and there has to be some flexibility there. So, if you are struggling, maybe struggling just like within your own heart and feeling empty and hollow, what a great time to go and feed something bigger or help somebody else who, I won't even say has it harder than you, but has a struggle that you can help with.
Mm.
That there's real enrichment. It brings us joy to help another. I mean, isn't that why we share yoga?
Yeah.
And when we can loosen up about like how many people are in our class or whatever, and how many people are in another person's class, and just be like, wow, how wonderful that there's these people who really appreciate what I have to offer. And that is, it's better than money.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Until next time.
Ahui ho, until we meet again. Aloha.